The siege of the Imperial Palace on Terra had ground on for 50 long, bloody days of death and horror. The Loyalists had fought to the last, but had been vastly outnumbered by the Warmaster Horus's traitors and the demonic servants of the Chaos Gods. Despite their heroic resistance, the outer walls of the Imperial Palace had been breached. The surviving Loyalists had been forced to withdraw to their final line of defense above the ultimate gate, the entrance into the Sanctum Imperialis, where the Emperor sat upon the golden throne. The Chaos Titans and other demon engines of the Dark Mechanicum had begun to pound the walls of the Sanctum Imperialis with their massive weapons. The Warmaster's corrupted Space Marines, Chaos Cultists, and demons swarmed below, eager for the chance to taste Loyalist blood. Though the Blood Angels Primarch Sanguinius had managed to hold the gate against an assault by the greater demon Kabanda, victory for the traitors seemed to be only a matter of time. In orbit above battered Terra, Horus Lupercal felt so close to victory he could taste it. He was preparing to teleport down to the surface from his flagship the Vengeful Spirit when he was stopped by Erebus of the Wordbearers. The former First Chaplain now served as the Warmaster's primary conduit to the Dark Gods of the Warp. He reported that their demonic allies had learned that the Loyalist Space Wolves, Dark Angels, and Ultramarines legions had all been sighted only hours away from translating into the Sol system. At that moment, Horus knew an emotion once completely alien to him: despair. His entire campaign had been predicated on capturing Terra and killing the Emperor swiftly, before the Loyalist numbers could be brought to bear. That gamble had failed. Once the incoming legions made planetfall, the siege would become a campaign of attrition, one that ultimately would favor the Emperor's lapdogs. Yet there still remained one final gambit that could seize victory. Horus immediately ordered all communications between the Throne World and the Void blocked, so the Loyalists on the surface would receive no word from their arriving rescuers. Then he ordered the void shields of the Vengeful Spirit lowered, despite the squeals of protest from his crew. With the shields down, teleportation from the surface to the traitor flagship would be possible. The Warmaster's only chance was to convince the Emperor to come to him. If the Emperor left the Golden Throne, the traitor's demonic allies might be able to breach the Imperial webway and take the palace from within. At the same time, Horus would face his father on his own terms and on his own ground. He believed the Emperor would not pass up the chance to end the conflict without further bloodshed. Horus himself would serve as the bait that lured his father out of hiding. But the Warmaster never realized that the Master of Mankind had been waiting for him to make this exact move. Down below, beneath the tortured surface of Terra, the Emperor sensed the Vengeful Spirit shields being deactivated. With a nod to Malkador, he indicated the time had come for the Sigillite to assume his place on the Golden Throne. As Malkador settled down on the great psychic amplifier, the Emperor stood on his own 2 feet beside the Primarchs Rogal Dorn and Sanguinius for the first time in years. For his part, Malkador could no longer speak. Such was the concentration he needed to control the vast power at his command. His mind offered the only protection Terra had from the demons waiting in the shattered corridors of the Imperial webway. The Emperor made clear to his sons his determination to teleport aboard the Vengeful Spirit and give Horus the confrontation he craved. They stubbornly refused his order to remain behind and insisted on coming with him. The Emperor agreed reluctantly, but warned that the battle to come offered the only real chance to stop Horus's madness. He looked sadly at Malkador, aware that his friend was buying this opportunity with his life. Though the Emperor was uncertain of the final outcome, he knew this terrible sacrifice was needed to guarantee that humanity still had a future. Then the Emperor, the Primarchs, and a detachment of the Custodian Guard disappeared in a blaze of golden light, teleporting up to the unprotected Vengeful Spirit. A flash of light and a feeling of coldness enveloped the Emperor and his companions as they teleported onto the Warmaster's flagship. The Emperor instantly realized that something had gone wrong. The other custodians and his Primarchs were not present, and the Emperor wondered uneasily if Horus had grown so powerful that he could now even disrupt a teleport beam. The Imperials wandered through a vessel hideously distorted beyond all recognition by the warping power of chaos. The interior of the ship had been twisted to reflect the unstable nature of the Imperium. Transparent veins bore rivers of blood along conduits in the floor. Carpets of mucus covered a road of tongues. Winged and distorted things that might once have been human flitted through archways of bone and perched on ledges of rib. Coming under constant attack from all the horrors to be found on the ship, including demons, mutants, and heretic Astartes, the small Loyalist party fought their way across the vessel in search of the Warmaster. As the Emperor lashed out with his flaming sword and psychic might, he realized that his Primarchs would each have to find their own way to Horus. Sanguinius was the first to stumble through the hideous corridors of the traitor flagship and come upon Horus on the vessel's command deck. The Blood Angel's Primarch found his once beloved brother nearly unrecognizable, swollen like a hideous giant with the power of all 4 Chaos Gods. The Warmaster was surprised how Sanguinius' sheer nobility still sparked pangs of jealousy within his blackened heart. Horus welcomed his brother to the Vengeful Spirit and offered him a place by his side in the Empire to come, though he knew the offer would be refused. Sanguinius replied by asking his brother why he would turn his back on their father's dream of a better future. When it became clear that the angel would not be corrupted, Horus refused to give an answer and launched his attack. Still injured and exhausted from the terrible battle with Kabanda, Sanguinius proved no match for the Warmaster, who strangled the life from him with contemptuous ease. The only damage Sanguinius did to the Warmaster was to create a small dent in Horus's armor. Some would later say, however, that it was through this small weakness created in Horus's defenses that the Emperor was able to deliver the fatal blow. Like so many others, Sanguinius too had sacrificed his life for the Emperor's dream. But Horus had never been willing to make that sacrifice. With his death, the angel made clear the weakness in his brother that chaos had used to consume his soul. Not long after, the Emperor finally arrived at the command deck and discovered Horus standing astride the shattered body of a broken angel. The bodies of the custodians that had followed after Sanguinius lay scattered like massacred dolls. Horus laughed at his father, his face turned crimson by the glow of his internal bloodlight and the raw might of chaos flowing through him. The Emperor was utterly shocked by the change the corruption of chaos had wrought in his son. He had known of the close bond that existed between Horus and Sanguinius, and found it hard to imagine that Horus could kill his best friend. Horus had always been his father's favorite. The Emperor simply could not accept that his son and the good man he had known was wholly lost to him. Horus mocked his father, declaring that he had done what the master of mankind could not, and bound the dark gods of chaos to his will. He promised that he would lead humanity into a new age of galactic supremacy by harnessing the power of chaos. Horus pledged to spare his father's life if he would kneel and swear his allegiance. The Emperor only shook his head sadly. Thousands of years older than the Warmaster, he knew all too well the trap that had closed about Horus. The Emperor told the corrupted Primarch that, like all who had come before, He was the deluded slave of chaos, not its master. No mortal was ever more than a pawn to the ruinous powers. The Warmaster was consumed by rage at those words, and unleashed a bolt of psychic force at the Emperor, who screamed in agony. The Emperor summoned his own power, and lashed out at his son, negating his assault. The Emperor rushed forward, his flaming sword striking sparks from Horus's energy-wreathed lightning claw. Weapons clashed, as battle was joined between the two at every level: physical, psychic, and even spiritual. The chamber was filled with energies capable of leveling planets, and the Vengeful Spirit shook from prow to stern. A backhand swipe knocked the Emperor through a stone bulkhead. His counterstroke tore a supporting column out of the ceiling, as Horus ducked. The Emperor could sense the chaos powers in the warp. They howled in glee as they fed their pawn ever more power. They had waited a long time for this chance to strike at their most hated foe. The Master of Mankind stood alone against their undivided power, and knew that he was losing. The truth was, he simply could not bring himself to unleash his full force upon Horus. The Warmaster was a traitor, but deep within himself, the Emperor still believed Horus to be his most beloved son and greatest friend. He could not believe that the man he had fought beside, whose life he had saved and who had saved his, was really beyond salvation. He allowed Horus to have his way, hoping that the sheer carnage might lead him to realize his terrible mistake. But Horus was under no such constraints. After a score of thrusts and parries, Horus cut through the Emperor's chest armor, his power-wreathed talon slicing his jugular. He proceeded to sever the tendons in the Master of Mankind's right wrist, causing his sword to clatter helplessly to the deck. He crushed the Emperor's windpipe and used a psychic blast to sear the flesh from his face, destroying his left eye. After tearing his father's right arm from its socket, Horus raised the golden armored figure high above his head and brought him down upon one knee, crushing his father's spine. The Warmaster howled with savage glee at his triumph. Suddenly, the vicious pummeling stopped. Through his one good eye, the Emperor saw that a lone custodian had come onto the command deck and charged Horus without hesitation to rescue his lord. The Warmaster just looked at him and laughed, allowing the custodian to see what he had done to the Emperor. The Emperor instantly realized what was going to happen next. He saw the triumph in Horus's face and knew his servant, a loyal and good man, was about to die. Horus simply blasted the warrior to ash with his psychic energy, giving the custodian no further thought. The Master of Mankind was stung by the death. That Horus had so callously and casually killed the man, without ceremony, without mercy, jolted the Emperor. It was the final evidence he needed that the Horus he had known and loved was truly gone. That good man had been destroyed forever by the madness of chaos and the dark power he had embraced. The Emperor had hoped that he could somehow rescue Horus and free him from the sickness of ambition. But the grip of the Chaos Gods had become too strong. Their claws sunk too deep into the weakness in Horus's soul. The Emperor realized that he had to kill his son to break the hold of chaos on him, and that he would not get another chance. The Master of Mankind focused his psychic might into a bolt of pure force more destructive than a supernova. He hurled the bolt at Horus, which lanced through the Warmaster's heart. Driven by all the force of his rage, pain, and grief, the Emperor willed Horus's death. He sensed the Chaos Gods' withdrawal of their power from their pawn, as his defeat was now inevitable. Their only chance had been for the Emperor to defeat himself, because he was unwilling to surrender his compassion for his son. That gambit had failed. As the dark gods retreated, sanity finally returned to the Warmaster for the first time in almost a decade. The Emperor saw the guilt at the countless atrocities he had committed flicker across Horus's face. The Primarch howled in remorse and begged the Emperor to kill him, for the Chaos gods still called to him, and he was too weak to resist their temptations. The Emperor knew that the ruinous powers could attempt to possess Horus again, or even resurrect him. Death was simply not enough. He forced all mercy and compassion from his mind, all feelings of fatherly pride and affection. For the sake of the humanity he had served and loved all the years of his long life, the Emperor summoned his power once more. With a final blast, he destroyed Horus utterly, burning his soul from existence even within the warp. There would be no resurrection. On Terra, the sudden death of the Warmaster unleashed a potent psychic shockwave that swept across the massed traitor forces before the gates of the Sanctum Imperialis. The demons of chaos were banished back into the warp as their master's powers were temporarily disrupted. Confusion broke out among the traitor Primarchs, and their remaining armies soon lost all cohesion. At the same time, the Space Marines of the Blood Angels all began suffering horrific psychic visions of the death of Sanguinius at Horus's hands. In the first instance of the terrible curse later known as the Black Rage, the Blood Angels suddenly broke ranks and assaulted the traitors in close combat. Their sheer savagery shocked the Loyalists as well as the enemy. The Imperial Fists and White Scars used the unexpected onslaught to their advantage. They launched a decisive counterattack that ultimately forced the traitor legions to retreat toward their dropships. Even the mighty Chaos Titans were felled and destroyed one by one. The retreat soon became a bloody rout, and the demoralized traitor forces fled Terra in utter defeat. It was Rogal Dorn and his Imperial Fists who discovered the broken body of the Emperor. Dorn discovered that the Emperor still lived, but only barely. Obeying his father's instructions, Dorn and the surviving Loyalists teleported back to the Imperial Palace. They found Malcador all but dead, his shriveled form kept alive atop the Golden Throne only by sheer force of will. Despite the objections of Jagatai Khan, Dorn had the Mechanicum's tech priests make the exchange, placing the Emperor's shattered form back on the Golden Throne. Malcador's body crumbled to ash as it was removed, but not before he transferred a final spark of life force to the Emperor. The Emperor suddenly awakened and explained that though his psychic powers would return to their full strength in time, his body would never heal. He would remain bound to the Golden Throne for all time, eternally directing the light of the Astronomicon and protecting Terra from demonic incursions out of the webway. He proclaimed Malcador would forever after be remembered as Malcador the Hero for his great sacrifice. The Emperor left control of the Imperium in the hands of his remaining Primarchs, and ordered them to cleanse the taint of chaos from the stars so it could never again threaten humanity. He promised them that this was not the end, but just the beginning of a new crusade to save mankind. Then the Emperor closed his remaining eye and spoke no more. The Siege of Terra had been won. The Horus heresy was over. A new age, the age of the Imperium, had begun. Though the years to come were often desperate, the twin sacrifices of Malcador and the Emperor guaranteed they would never be hopeless. From those sacrifices was born a new faith, one whose creed would be spoken by countless billions for the next 10,000 years. The Emperor protects.